I will not comply. 5 words, unambiguous, defiant, and aimed directly at Prime Minister Keir Starmer's new digital identity scheme, which ministers now say will be mandatory for right-to-work checks by the end of this parliament, even as they present it as a free, simple app on a phone. 2 million signatures and counting have landed on a parliament petition rejecting digital ID outright, a roar that has pushed this story from fringe to front page in a matter of days. The government smiles for the cameras, calls it security and progress, but peel away the press lines and one question hangs in the air. Who controls the switch once the architecture is built? Fast facts, no fluff. Labour's plan, a national digital ID, app-based, rolled out by 2029 and compulsory for anyone who wants to work in the UK, with employers barred from relying on paper checks or a borrowed national insurance number, according to government briefings and major broadcasters' explainers. Ministers argue it will deter illegal working and curb benefit fraud and identity theft. It is free, will sit on a phone like the NHS app, and, they say, will make public services easier to access over time. Critics say it risks centralizing sensitive data at scale, making a hacker's dream that could expose millions if breached. Legal and civil liberties groups question proportionality and necessity, while opposition figures argue it will not stop small boats, but will burden the law-abiding. Petitions have surged past 2 to 2.5 million signatures across the official Parliament channel and wider campaigns, forcing formal government responses and energizing national debate. Here is the line that separates reassurance from reality. Once the state standardizes identity, location, and eligibility into one credential, the temptation to extend its use has historically grown, not shrunk, as previous fights over ID cards and surveillance powers demonstrated in living memory. 2 decades ago, Britain scrapped ID cards and destroyed the database. Today, the card is not in a wallet, it is in a phone, connected, updatable, and potentially interoperable across services, which amplifies both utility and risk. Voluntary is doing a great deal of work in public messaging, but the government's own lines state digital ID will be mandatory for right-to-work checks before the next election deadline, reframing choice as the ability to forego employment, a trade-off many will view as no choice at all. Meanwhile, the culture war fuse is lit. Katie Hopkins, a lightning-rod conservative commentator, says she was interviewed under caution by police in August over things she said on a live stream called Katie's Arms, denouncing the process as an Article 10 free speech violation. She posted statements outside Exeter Police Station and reiterated that she would not comply with digital ID overreach. Whether one agrees with Hopkins or not, the optics are undeniable. An ongoing national argument about identity and power now intersects with policing of speech, intensifying concerns that identity, expression, and permission could converge in ways Britain has long resisted. That is where the story stops being about a phone app and starts being about the British settlement between the individual and the state. So here is the plain question for tonight. Is a free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for work and marketed as modernization the price of security or the thin end of a wedge that Britain rejected once before and may need to reject again?
We have been here before, Jane. New powers arrive neatly wrapped in language about efficiency and safety, then remain long after the emergency passes, expanding by increments into everyday life. History's lesson is that states rarely build complex systems just to use them less over time. The government now says plainly, no digital ID, no legal right to work by the end of this parliament, which means people will have to obtain and present it to earn a living. That is not a small policy tweak. That is a constitutional pivot in daily life.
And the petition numbers matter, John. Over 2 million on the Parliament site, with media reporting 2.4 to 2.5 million in days. That is a mainstream revolt, not a fringe tantrum, and it is forcing ministers and opposition alike into a live-fire debate they did not rehearse for in the manifesto. Even the BBC and Reuters are spelling out the core promise and the core compulsion, free to download but compulsory for work. And, outside Labour's 2024 manifesto framing, raising the accountability stakes.
Security claims deserve scrutiny on two fronts: effectiveness and collateral risk. Effectiveness, because people smuggling networks adapt faster than Whitehall. Collateral risk, because a single federated identity, if compromised, exposes not just a name and date of birth, but the keys to employment, services, and routine verification across life. Industry lawyers are already warning this will be extremely challenging to implement, which is polite code for expect errors, exclusions, delays, and lawsuits, particularly for small employers navigating new checks under time pressure.
Then there is the data architecture question. The government's explainer pitches convenience. Tax records, licenses, childcare, benefits flowing more smoothly once identity is unified. But each integration point can multiply attack surfaces and governance complexity. Centralization raises the ceiling on systemic failure. Civil liberties groups and fintech leaders are cautioning against a government monopoly on identity and urging plural, reusable credentials to reduce single-point risks. That is a sign that even tech champions sense the dangers of over-consolidation.
And we cannot duck the politics of precedence. Britain killed ID cards in the 2000s. The public memory of that victory is part of the national story. Citizens as principals, the state as agent, not the other way around. Bringing back ID, even digitally and for work, revives a cultural pressure point that unites libertarians, civil liberties lawyers, and many everyday voters who have no desire to become a QR code at their own front door.
Which is why Hopkins is such a volatile catalyst in this moment. Her police interview under caution, no charge, but an investigative dragnet over a live stream, turns a technical policy into an existential one about Article 10 and the boundary between offensive expression and criminal speech in a modern democracy. The imagery of her statement outside Exeter Police Station traveled because it felt like a preview: verified identity, verified speech, verified permission, a world where the wrong joke becomes a file note.
To be fair, the government insists this is about stopping illegal working and streamlining services, and says people will not be asked to carry ID on the street like a passbook. Right to work is the hard requirement, not random spot checks in public. But when employment is the hinge of adult life, mortgage, rent, bills, dignity, making the credential compulsory to work is functionally universal, whatever the optics of not mandatory day-to-day might suggest.
Let us project the downstreams. Employers will need compliance systems to check digital IDs. Non-compliance risks fines and criminal exposure. Hiring delays will penalize smaller firms first, which already struggle with HR complexity. Workers without smartphones or with accessibility needs or with mismatched records may be stranded in bureaucratic limbo, digitally excluded in a system that presumes seamless adoption.
Now stitch that to speech. If future online safety or verification rules ever link accounts to government-issued identity, even partially, you get a chilling fusion. Every post immutably attributable, every sanction instantly enforceable, every dissenter perfectly legible to both state and platform. Ministers deny such linkages planned, and yet politics is a sequence of half-steps. What is unimaginable on Monday becomes inevitable by Friday once the pipes exist and the incentives align.
There is also geopolitics of example. Estonia gets cited as the gold standard, high trust, highly digital. But Estonia's journey spans 2 decades of carefully layered infrastructure and citizen buy-in. Copying the endpoint without the path is how democracies trip over their own feet. China is the opposite parable. Digital ID fused to social credit, where the ID is not merely a key, but a leash. Britain is not China, but architectures do not care about constitutions, only about permission and capability.
The petition surge shows the public understands stakes at gut level. 2 to 2.5 million signatures forces Parliament to engage, and broadcasters are treating this as a first-order constitutional shift rather than a minor admin reform. The conversation has jumped the groove from policy detail to national identity. Do we remain a country that presumes liberty by default, or one that requires permission as standard?
Expect litigation. Civil liberties organizations are tooling up for proportionality challenges, data protection reviews, and equality impacts on those least able to navigate mandatory digital systems. Each case drags timelines and forces concessions. Business groups will press for phased enforcement, sandboxing, and indemnities for false negatives to avoid wrongful exclusion from work. That pressure will reveal how rigid or adaptive Whitehall intends to be.
And if implementation stumbles, breach headlines, false matches, or a major outage preventing thousands from starting jobs, the political cost will be immediate and measurable. Nothing concentrates the mind like pay being blocked by an app crash. This is why risk centralization matters. When identity becomes a single keel under the nation's daily life, a leak anywhere can list the whole ship.
Meanwhile, cultural resistance is crystallizing around a simple civil phrase, "I will not comply," a moral refusal rather than a riotous one. Nonviolent noncompliance has deep British roots, and it terrifies bureaucracies precisely because it is so lawful and so contagious. Public mood, not just party messaging, will decide whether this settles as a tool or metastasizes into a symbol of government overreach. At 2 million signatures, the mood is not subtle.
So, where can a responsible compromise live? One possibility is privacy by design architecture with independent oversight, minimal centralized retention, and legally enforceable limits on function creep, coupled with a plural market of reusable IDs rather than a single state monopoly. Another is to ring-fence scope in primary legislation, right to work only, no extension to healthcare, banking, travel, or online identity without fresh primary acts, plus a sunset review requiring Parliament to reconsent after real-world evidence, not promises.
But here's the hard truth. Promises are not protections. Constitutions are lived in procedures, not in press releases. What is required is verifiable guardrails, adversarial audits, and meaningful remedies when the state errs against a citizen's livelihood or speech. Until that exists, the public suspicion remains rational, not reactionary. Britons have seen databases built, stretched, breached, and defended with the same slogans before.
In the end, this is not a tech story, it's a trust story. Do citizens trust this government and its successors to handle a master key to their working lives without creeping expansion, error, or abuse? Trust is earned slowly and lost suddenly. 2 million signatures say the government has not earned it yet.
And that leaves the oldest constitutional question in the British book: consent. Government by consent means the burden of proof lies with power, not with the people. If ministers want a nation of compliant ID holders, they must persuade a nation of skeptics, not corral them. Until then, expect the 4 words to echo, louder each week: I will not comply.
Now a question for the viewers of Alert View. Should a free digital ID that is mandatory for work ever be acceptable in Britain? Or does permission to earn a living cross a red line that no government should pass? Share a view in the comments and say whether Parliament should legislate hard limits or scrap the scheme outright. If this analysis matters, subscribe to Alert View and activate the bell. Coverage here follows the evidence, not the slogan, with coming deep dives into legal challenges, implementation risks, and what alternative models could protect both borders and British liberty without a universal work pass on a phone. Stay with Alert View for the updates others publish after the fact, because when identity is redesigned, democracy is redesigned too.